Hey guys, I'm JanetOnOccasion, and today we're looking at Mortal Empires. Sorry, Immortal Empires. We're looking at Immortal Empires. Need to stop saying Mortal Empires. It's like a reflex at this point, because I've said Mortal Empires a billion times over the last several years. But no, this is the next step in Empires. So, an introduction to Immortal Empires. It's about time we heard something about this. I'm very excited about it. Also, I love the key art for this blog. It's kind of a adaptation of the one we got for Mortal Empires, which was Karl Franz looking over like Lustria, and you can see the vortex in the background. Now we can see the Great Bastion, which is really cool. I really like that. Really good key art. I love the art from this game. It's really good stuff. So, an introduction to Immortal Empires, behind the scenes by Total War. So, Immortal Empires is easily the most anticipated game mode coming to Total War Warhammer 3 and represents the world-encompassing vision we've been working towards since first partnering with Games Workshop nearly a decade ago. That's a long time, but my god, the amount of content they've made for it is astounding. So, the combined battlefield brings everything we've built throughout the Total War Warhammer series into Warhammer 3, including the races, factions, units, and legendary lords, all of which will find their home on a massive battlefield that spans the Warhammer world. In every respect, it's the most ambitious project, and hands down the most complicated one we've ever attempted, and we're thrilled to begin sharing more about the game mode now and in the weeks to come. So yeah, it is hella ambitious, but it's going to lay out exactly why, and I think it's very easy for people to forget that Warhammer 2 is unrecognisable from its release. You know, it tripled in size and in scope since it launched, and that's all being carried over into Warhammer 3, which also was a huge leap in scope. You know, every like major core mechanic, not like, you know, faction mechanics, but the actual game, how the game functions, you know, diplomacy and all that sort of stuff. That was all changed. You know, that all got a big refit, and now that has to be strapped on to every single campaign that was done for this game that's the size of like 4 games already. You know, 4 games worth of content is being added, and I say that because it was sort of game 1, game 2, and then, like I said, game 2 basically tripled in size by the end. I mean, broadly, I'm not doing the sums. If you want to do the maths, it probably like was 8 times the size by the end. So anyway, for all of you looking to get your hands on Immortal Empires, we're aiming to roll out the beta version of the game mode this August, which is really soon. So I'm very happy about that. Don't worry, we'll explain exactly what we mean by beta further below, but first we want to spotlight some of what it'll bring to Total War Warhammer 3. So what's in Immortal Empires? Let's see that scope, shall we? So Immortal Empires is much more than the sum of each game's content smashed together into a larger map. Rather, the new game mode offers a variety of new features and approaches to the combined battlefield. So first off, access to all 86 legendary lords from all 3 Total War Warhammer titles. 86 is like too many. If this was like anyone's entry into the franchise, I mean, that's more content than anyone can play. For someone like me, who ostensibly plays it for a living, I'm going to be very, very busy, especially with new content releases and things. But honestly, like, the amount of campaigns that I can now play that I haven't played yet, even, you know, Warhammer 1 and 2 Legendary Lords, the ones I haven't even got around to playing there, as well as playing new revised versions of ones I've already played in like a bigger map with different context. It's insane. I could be making content forever. I will never be able to catch up to the amount of content being produced for the game. So it's, you know, it's a good time to be me, I suppose. And yeah, and you guys are even more spoiled because you don't have the, you know, financial provocation for doing this. But anyway, so Be'lakor is now a legendary lord with his own faction. Hooray! A lot of people were like, why can't we play as Be'lakor? Well, he was the, you know, antagonist of the campaign for everybody. So I kind of got that, and I didn't really want to play him in that campaign, honestly. Because that would have been weird. Because, yeah, he sort of is outside of the goings-on the campaign map. That's sort of the point. But I am thrilled we get to play him now, when it's not the same context as the Warhammer 3 main campaign. You know, he should exist as his own faction outside of that. So I'm very glad to see that we will get him. Also, dedicated factions for a number of the older legendary lords, including Grombrindle, Helmengorst, and Voltmar Grimm. So these guys are going to have their own sub-factions now. So before, they all shared a faction with another character. You know, or, well, for a while, Voltmar shared a faction with a couple of characters. It used to be him, Balthazar Gelt, and Karl Franz all sat in the same spot. So yeah, it's nice they're all getting their own place. But I have mixed feelings about it, but as long as their new campaigns are, like, fun, and it sort of offers up more gameplay, I'm happy with that. But I do kind of like the idea of more dynamic starts, where legendary lords like that, you can recruit sort of into your faction if it feels relevant, because it's weird that Karl Franz wouldn't be able to get the Grand Theogonist or Supreme Patriarch on his side without having to confederate swathes of territory. That feels a bit weird to me. So I have mixed feelings about it, but generally I like the idea of having more campaigns to play with more variety. So this, I think, is the best way to do it, if they're not going to make it fully dynamic like that. But anyway, new starting locations for 29 of the older legendary lords. There's a lot more map now, you know, with Cathay and Mountains of Morn, and I guess the Chaos Wastes for random characters to be moved around. And who knows what other bits of map are going to be available, because we don't know, we don't have a map yet. We can't see what there is yet. So there could be a lot. Could be a lot of room for you know, moving the characters around into more sort of suitable locations that just weren't available in the previous campaign. So improved personal faction mechanics for a selection of the older legendary lords, such as Voltmar the Grim. So there we go. You know, they're making it worthwhile to move him, giving you something unique to do. A new sea lanes feature, which allow you to move armies between distant lands and continents from one side of the map to the other without leapfrogging them all the way across the map. This is brilliant. This I really like. Because there's more things that remedy the same problem I have, but you don't see most of the map when you're playing Mortal Empires. And I would hate for that problem to be brought over to Immortal Empires as well. But the idea that you can actually just sort of sail to different places in the map, just sort of, you know, going from, like, you know, like teleporting, I guess. You know, if that's something you can do, then you're going to be able to conquer completely different lands further away from your capital and encounter new enemies, right? Rather than just the ones you're going to see every single time. So there will be some variety now. Even if you're just playing the single campaign over and over again, you can then take it in different directions, just because you have a quick way to access very different parts of the map. So I love that. I love that. Also, just making little outposts and having little story dynamics where you're just like, oh, and then I go over here to knacker this little sub-faction, you know, across the map or something. Like, there's room to play the game a bit more broadly, rather than just expanding out from where you start, I imagine. So that's good for sort of the mid to late game, which is always a bit rubbish. Honestly, the early game is brilliant in every Total War campaign. Then it tends to get a bit boring as you get too powerful. But the idea of being able to go off on these random adventures sounds great. So, new dynamic endgame scenarios. Another thing that remedies this. So, randomised mid to late game challenges we're introducing to challenge the late game steamroll, where the player is so powerful there's little to no challenge left and less of a reason to complete the campaign. Think greenskin invasions or resurgences of the undead as a few examples. So, the idea of there being a dynamic, it's the fact that it's dynamic that is the really cool thing here. It means that every character will have their own bespoke thing, and it might be different every time you play. You know, the enemies might show up in completely different places. I mean, think Vortex campaigns, how when you did a ritual, stuff would spawn, but where it spawned was always a little different depending on how big your empire was and the territory it inhabited. So think of something like that, but with some other invasion that's relevant to what you're doing. I think that's really good, and it's a way to keep engaged later on, and it's a way to have some tension later on. Which I think is great. So, you know, much more likely to stay long-term in a campaign if you're going to bump into these things. And I guess there's no reason why they can't have these events happen multiple times. You know, with it sort of getting bigger and more terrible, or even you have a sort of, I don't know, Rise of Nagash style, you know, undead sweeping across the lands. And then once you dealt with that, it's only, you know, a matter of time before, like, a chaos invasion happens to try and take over the world, you know, depending on how much you've taken. Because if it's a case of your empire is so big that you're pretty much the dominant power in the world, then a chaos invasion is going to be a threat to you, even if chaos isn't normally the thing your faction is associated with dealing with, right? So the fact that it's dynamic is what leads me to believe that there's a lot of opportunity to sort of have, very unique things happen, depending on how you're playing and what you're up to, which sounds great to me. So it really depends on how far they push it, but it sounds great. Just the word dynamic does a lot of work, but it's good work that word is doing there. So, revamped victory conditions, another thing well worth doing. So most players don't end up finishing campaigns because of all of the previous, aforementioned things, and we want to give them better reasons and a greater level of satisfaction for doing so. As such, we've simplified the victory conditions into more meaningful objectives while avoiding any arbitrary playstyle requirements. So that is huge as well. Just simply having it, something along the lines of defeat your main rival and then take over, and maybe not even take over a bunch of the map. However much of the map that you take over should be to facilitate taking out your main rivals in the campaign, and that should be everything you need to do. If you want to have a single settlement and then you just take out everyone who your character is historically, against, that should be enough to trigger a victory. Like, you shouldn't have to actually build an empire if you don't want to. If you want to challenge yourself and just have a single settlement, you should still be able to win. But the arbitrary, defeat all these guys and then own 150 settlements. I don't want to do that. Like, the main threat to my campaign, my main rivals are done. So now I just have to pick fights with random people, whether it feels appropriate to or not. You've just taken the story out of my hands. I really hated that, because there's no real reason not to let people win in 2 turns. Like, when it comes down to it, who cares how quickly someone can win? The win just has to be satisfying. I don't think it's satisfying if you've done the big stuff of your, hit the big narrative beats, and there's just filler at the end of a campaign. There's no point. So hopefully they've done a good job with these, and and it'll just be facilitate your story, and then you can end without it overstaying its welcome. Or you can then, they already have tiers of victories. They always have a short and a long campaign victory, right? So make the long campaign victory. Just throw in a bunch of arbitrary stuff into that one for people who want to really, paint the map and be sort of completionist about it. Not just take out your rivals, but take out everyone associated with your rivals, But anyway, so I'm glad it's getting a rework, because it's always bothered me a bit. I've had to stop a lot of campaigns, even on the channel, just like right at the end, because we've run out of things to do, but the game hasn't given us the win yet. And that's really frustrating. So I hope they do make these, simple to achieve, but rewarding. So we'll see. Especially with the dynamic endgame scenarios to spice things up. Sounds great. So, corruption rework. Players will have new tools for spreading or reducing corruption through more active usage of their armies. Small amounts of natural production will also be available to uncorrupted factions. So that, I don't know how that's going to play out, but I like the idea of corruption being a more major sort of theme, because it's Warhammer, and that's kind of the whole thing, is the whole sort of reason why the world is what it is because people are corruptible. It's corruption has created these vast, sort of nationalist paranoia and all sorts. It's what has triggered the good versus evil thing, and all of the sort of inter-fighting between factions that are ostensibly the good guys or the bad. Like, everyone fights everyone, and that's usually because of the corruption or threat of it. So, in one way or another, whether it's tempted by the dark arts, taking up necromancy, or if it's chaos proper, or if it's, Skaven with their own sort of agenda. There's all sorts, and I think it's only good that feels a bit more meaty, but we'll see. We'll see how it plays. It might still just sort of fade into the background mostly. We'll see. So, 8-player multiplayer campaigns. As a bonus, only the host of the Immortal Empires multiplayer campaign needs to own all 3 games. Friends who only own Warhammer 3 will still be able to join the campaign, though their Legendary Lord choices will naturally be limited to the ones they own. So this, I think, is a great direction to go in, but I don't think I've gone far enough with this. Just straight up make the campaign available to everybody. Just do that. Like, let anyone play it. You're limited to the lords you own anyway, so you can only play, the campaigns from Warhammer 3, but give people a new map to play it in. They will come back to the game just to play that. To go, well, I guess I didn't play all of the Warhammer 3 lords, because we had one campaign and that got stale after a couple of plays, so I've got this whole plethora of characters I want to play, but in a new context. so I'll play it in Immortal Empires. And oh, look at this, I've now played 300 hours of Total War Warhammer 3. You know what? I think I will spend a $5 to buy some new DLC from one of the other games. Like, why not, right? I think the only thing that really gets in the way of that is possibly if... Actually, no, it can't be. I was going to say, if you own DLC from, like, Warhammer 1, you have to own Warhammer 1 to buy that DLC. I don't know if that's the case or not, really. I don't know if that's necessarily true. But if they just make it all available for Warhammer 3, you know, then people just buy the exact thing that they want. And it would just make Warhammer 1 and 2 just the two, like, most impressive standalone DLCs for Warhammer 3 ever, right? It'd be like, buy one game and unlock 20 new Legendary Lords, you know? And how cool would that be? So it'd just be like a big DLC to buy Warhammer 2, but, you know, with all the free DLC and everything, that is. So I think that'd be really good, but, you know, I guess there's some limitations there, but honestly, I just think if you're already limiting what is playable, then just give people the map to play, and I think that there's no better advert for buying older content than having that new campaign to play what you do own in. So I want to see that, and I will be pushing for that in the background. You know, I do have a line to suggest things to devs, you know, I do have a direct line with them, so I will try, but, you know, a lot of the stuff is who knows how it works, right? Who knows what their options are? Who knows what they're limited by? I don't know, but it is certainly something I'm going to push personally, because I just think that's the best way to advertise the game, is to give people the freedom to play it, you know? Because for a lot of people, Immortal Empires is the game, right? People don't care about the smaller campaigns. A lot of people just gave up on Vortex straight away. They only played Mortal Empires, and I think for Immortal Empires the same will probably apply. And I think people should have access to it, but, you know, we'll see. So, as you can see, on top of the enormous collection of content, there are plenty of new features and improvements on the way, including a new lease of life for many of the older Legendary Lords. We'll be talking about each of these points in the weeks to come, so watch out for more deep dives into them in the future. And subscribe to my channel for when I talk about them. Yeah. Plug. So, why we're calling it a beta. Yeah, so this seemed inevitable. I mean, it was always going to be an ongoing thing, and given the fact they're injecting almost 90 new campaigns into a new game's, like, bedrock of mechanics, yeah, like, obviously, I don't think it even needs to be said. It was never going to be a finished product. Warhammer 2 came out, and, like, a bunch of stuff in Mortal Empires, when that launched later, was trash for years. Warriors of Chaos are still trash. You know, the fact that they're still rubbish, it doesn't mean that Mortal Empires was never finished, right? There was still plenty to do that was like a full game experience. But like, yeah, it's an ongoing thing. They could just say they're done whenever the hell they like, but they're not doing that. So it's sort of, how do you weigh that up? But anyway, let's see what they say. When Immortal Empires arrives this August, you'll notice that it initially appears with a beta tag, until such time as we feel it no longer applies. When we first mentioned this earlier in the year, we noted some concerns being raised within the community about the decision. Will Immortal Empires be finished when it launches? Will it be implemented in smaller parts over time? How long do we have to wait until it's fully playable? These are all fair questions in the absence of proper context. I mean, I can be flippant about it because I have the proper context. I've been alongside the whole development of this whole trilogy. So I don't have any missed information. It's not like any other game saying it's coming out as a beta and I go, oh, okay, so what, the first chapter or something? You know, I know that it's going to take time to work on, and they don't want to release something that's going to be full of bugs, because it's literally impossible to have 90 campaigns work perfectly on release, right? It's just not going to work. It's not going to happen. Get it into people's hands so they can play it. So, anyway, these are all fair questions without proper context, so we will take a moment to explain why you made this choice, and what you can expect from Immortal Empires when it actually arrives later this year. I mean, they're probably going to be more diplomatic about explaining this. I just think, like, obviously, but they can't say that, because, you know, this is for people that don't know. But anyway, to begin, we talk a little about how Immortal Empires is built. In order to create the game mode, the development team had to collect and combine the content, features, mechanics, systems, and code from 3 different code bases into a single mega campaign. Now, taking big chunks... Actually, just to immediately take a step back. So 3 different code bases. That's because they made each release better. They made big improvements to the core experience each time. They made big changes to that core experience. So, graphical changes and all sorts, as well as like gameplay mechanics, a billion different things. They could have just been lazy and just released it as standalone expansions that use the exact same code base and not change any systems, in which case we'd have a game that looks like Warhammer 1 and we'd have a bunch of new stuff in it earlier. But they didn't want to do that. They pushed the envelope every single time. So that's what makes it more difficult, So fair enough. Fair enough. I'm happy that they continue to push things. So now, taking big chunks of content, data and code from one game and porting them into another is always a challenge, speaking from experience in this regard, and takes a significant amount of time and tailoring to get all the pieces to play nice with each other and work properly. And there's a lot of pieces. Even after the technical implementations are done, there are still bugs to find and fix, as well as a significant amount of playtesting to ensure that, as an example, one race isn't ridiculously under or overpowered, or that each race's unique features and mechanics are working as intended. It's very difficult to say whether a bunch of factions that have like vassalization as a mechanic, is that going to work with new diplomatic mechanics in the base game. All of this stuff needs to be rigorously tested and checked and rewritten. There's a bunch of stuff that needs to be done there. Just like, they can make a list of things like make sure you don't break X when developing Warhammer 3, but just having to check while you're developing the new thing as to not break it is going to then take time anyway. So, you're best just to do the best thing possible and then work backwards, right? And just make sure everything's up to date from that. So, at least that's my guess, and that's what I would hope. So, even after the technical implementations are done, there are still bugs to find, blah, 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 blah. Okay, in short, Immortal Empires isn't just a port of content from one game to another, it's a mountain of phenomenally change-sensitive technical work. Here are a few examples of what's being done as we speak. So, lighting across battle maps is more advanced in Warhammer 3, so it takes time to get all the older environments reauthored to meet the same current standards. We saw that a lot in Mortal Empires as well, which, that game, free LC, I guess, that campaign, it was basically a beta as well, so it didn't call it that, but it basically was. Lighting was a big thing, that older maps looked really weird and all sorts. So achieving parity across other details such as the UI, character models, VFX, audio and general game balance will be a gradual process that continues over time. Yeah, so character models as well, they've upped the character details so much from the first game, even from the first game to the second game. That was like the space of a year, and like things like the steam tank looked really low res for the longest time, because they had to redo it basically, because the highest fidelity didn't meet the highest fidelity of Warhammer 2, and the same thing is happening here with Warhammer 3. There's a bunch of stuff that goes into it. A really interesting example as well is hair, how hair developed even throughout Warhammer 1. If you look at the if you got Warhammer 2 installed, which I know a lot of you do because a lot of you have gone back and played Mortal Empires, if you look at Grombrindle and Thorgrim, their portraits just in the the Lord Picker, right, when you're starting a new campaign, their hair looks completely different. Like Grombrindle's, you could see individual strands, and Thorgrim's is Play-Doh. It's sculpted face. It looks like a plastic model of a beard stuck to his face, whereas Grombrindle looks like he has hair. So just like stuff like that, just the technology used to make these models function changes so much, so quickly, and they keep pushing it, so they have to bring things back up to keep up. So anyway, so it'll be a gradual process that continues over time. Yep, just like the previous content we've had. Better to have it and have them fix it up as they go, Corruption is also a biggie. We changed how it works fundamentally in Warhammer 3, and we're doing even more to improve it in Immortal Empires. It's a game system that touches every playable race in regard to how they exploit, react to, or suffer from corruption, so it's a system that will continue to evolve until it settles in a good place. Yeah, it used to be one sort of corruption, sort of dominant. Now you can have multiple corruptions at 100% simultaneously in a single place. So, which, a bit bizarre, but fine. There's a lot of new stuff to tweak for that. So these are just a few of the more visible items that we have to contend with, and there are many, many more that could be a blog, or frankly, a novel of their own. We're determined to get Immortal Empires into your hands, but we want to be realistic. It won't be the final, finished product on day one, just as Immortal Empires wasn't at its launch in Warhammer 2. Ultimately, This entire 3-game project won't truly be complete for years to come, which is why we're initially launching it under the banner of a beta. It's worth noting that it won't be an opt-in beta. We'll be adding it right into the main game for Warhammer 3, which means it won't divide the player base across separate versions of the game, or harm the multiplayer experience if you want to dive into the new mode. Yeah, there's no point, because there'll only be one version of it, right? So it may as well exist in the main game. So I'm glad they're doing that. But, obviously the word beta, when it comes to like a Steam game, you assume if something is a beta, then the rest of the game isn't, whatever. So it's good they've just got that campaign will be considered a beta, but it's just going to be part of the main game. It means that if people want to dip into it and play some campaigns and then bump into some bugs and report those bugs, and everyone can contribute to making the game as good as it can be. Or just go, screw it, I'll just play it anyway, and I'll have a great time. And they can just play it, and that's great. So I know I will be. And if I bump into bugs, I'll laugh at them, because, there's bound to be some. Bound to be. I mean, Jesus Christ. Bound to be. I'd rather have it in my hands before they go through every square inch of that game, fixing everything. It is impossible. There's too much stuff. Let me do it. It'll be fine. So, it's worth noting the won't launch. Blah, blah, blah. Immortal Empires, Day 1. So, what will Immortal Empires be like come August? At present, our aim is for the mode to be fully content complete in terms of the available races, factions, legendary lords, units, and geography, as well as all the extra features and improvements noted in the What's New section above. You'll be able to start a full sandbox campaign to play and conquer however you wish, use any legendary lord accessible based on your game ownership, and from any of the 3 games, or experiment with the older legendary lords benefiting from their revamp, especially Gorst. Given the sheer scale of the project, there are about to be some visual and technical bugs, and we'll be providing a known issues list when Immortal Empires does go live. Nevertheless, we're confident that the game mode will be massive, packed with content, functional, and fun on day 1. Great. The evolution of Immortal Empires. The moment the Immortal Empires beta goes live, its life truly begins. In the years to come, we'll continue honing and improving it, adding new features and improving existing ones, and introducing new content to help it grow. Throughout this process, we'll want to hear from you about what you like and, yes, what you don't. We want to understand your impressions on things like the balance between factions, trends you're spotting across the campaigns you play, or anything that just rubs you the wrong way. We'll set up dedicated feedback channels for you to provide your thoughts, and we'll also be keeping a keen eye on the popular community hangouts, like the Total War subreddit. Major patches will still arrive alongside new content packs, as they did in Warhammer 2. But we'll also be releasing interim patches between content packs as well. When we start seeing trends around certain topics and features in Immortal Empires, we'll bring those items to the forefront of the queue and react to your feedback as quickly and efficiently as we're able. With all that in mind, when the Immortal Empires beta goes live, the best approach is to consider this Phase 1. It'll be the most enormous and varied strategic sandbox we've ever created, with all the content you expect and more. And we know it'll only get better over time. More to come, so stay tuned about Immortal Empires and the cool stuff coming to Warhammer 3. Subscribe to my channel. So, anyway. I mean, it says it's the most enormous and very strategic sandbox they've ever created. Possibly anyone has. Like, honestly, I know there's a lot of games like Stellaris and stuff like that, huge scope, but they don't have to, reckon with thousands of 3D model, all this crazy battle and grand campaign interactions, all the rest of it. It's crazy. It is mad, and this is hands down the most complete version of any Warhammer universe we've ever seen. And I think that's amazing. I think this is really cool. I'm very excited about it. And honestly, I hope this really reignites people's enthusiasm for the game as a whole. Because, Warhammer 3, I think people just assumed that was going to be a replacement for Warhammer 2 right out of the box. But that was never really going to be the plan. It was always going to be, here's the Warhammer 3 campaign. And with its new characters, you can play with that campaign. And then later comes the big thing. And I think most people were expecting the big thing. And this is the big thing, and it's coming. And when it does come, hopefully everyone will just go, oh, right, yeah, this is what we meant. This is what we were. Yeah, this is the one. Hopefully everyone will be excited about it as I am. And hopefully you guys will join me for a bunch of campaigns on the channel as well. I'm certainly excited about doing it. Even if it's a smaller audience than I feel it deserves, I'm sure it'll grow over time. Because I have the utmost faith in this studio for just continuing to deliver, you know, over-deliver, honestly, with their DLC. I think anyone who's sort of followed throughout the lifespan of Warhammer 2, every time a DLC came out, people were like, oh my god, we can do this thing now? This opens up so many opportunities, so much more, you know, stuff that can happen. And it did, you know, it just kept evolving, and old stuff kept getting revised in ways that no one thought was possible. You know, they kept just doubling down on, like, mad decisions, and the game just got better and better over time. It was wonderful. So I'm only yeah, I'm completely certain that'll be the case with Warhammer 3 and Immortal Empires, and I'm so keen to get my hands on it and see what it's all about. So it's gonna be cool. So guys, I hope you enjoyed that. Comment, like, subscribe. See you in the next one. Bye.